Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. So here's the thing about the current state of the story and world of Destiny. We are currently seeing the world and its factions align themselves into two sides. And as the saying goes, a side must always be taken. The two factions forming up to fight against each other would be the Coalition and the Disciples. The Coalition is made up of our own Guardian forces, the Awoken of the Reef, the Eliksni of the House of Light, the Cabal of Keitel's Ascendancy, the Cloudstriders of Neomuna presumably in the future, and Rasputin, the Warmind. The forces of the Witness and its disciples include the Taken, Xivu Arath and her Hive Broods, the Wrathborn forces, Calus and his Scion rebels under Euryx, and the Cabal Shadow Legion, as well as Eramis and the Eliksni of the House of Salvation. And then, most curiously of all for our purposes in this video today, the Scorn. It's them that we're going to predominantly be talking about today. The Witness favors its forces to be utterly devoted to its cause. Whilst the Coalition is united for the purpose of survival, its members have autonomy intact. The Witness, on the other hand, has worked to dominate its forces. It expects absolute loyalty, and where it cannot find such loyalty, it creates it. This is the principal reason why it's common for the Witness's forces to include mindless soldiers that can be directed at its own will. The Taken and Wrathborn and Scorn are all perfect examples of this. Others, such as Calus and Xivu Arath, proclaim undying loyalty and faith before the Witness as either dependable soldiers or groveling sycophants. But with such forces, there is a degree of fragility that can be exploited to potentially peel them away from the Witness. Their entire servitude to such a being is founded upon singular pillars, and as a result, for almost every group that has allied itself with the Witness, there is a way to potentially make them turn on their new master, and it all starts as such because those groups are tied to their leaders. The most obvious examples of this are Xivu Arath and Calus. On the one hand, it's unclear if Xivu knows about the past intent of the Traveler to elevate their species upon fundament, and about the Witness's lie that was told to Savathun, which forced them into the servitude of its own designs. If this was revealed to her, potentially by her sister or one that she trusts deeply, then it's not impossible that we would see Xivu Arath turn her forces on her master as retribution for its deception. For Calus, on the other hand, it's clear that whilst he has been overpowered by his vision of the end of the universe, as long as he sees the Witness weakened in some manner, he might come to the realization that such visions do not necessarily need to come to pass. More so than this, I think it's not impossible for him to remember that there is something to preserve the future for in the shape of his daughter. The Duality Dungeon from the Season of the Haunted shows us that Calus is haunted specifically by the betrayal of his daughter who he professes to love, albeit in a way that was manipulative and self-serving. Seeing a potential future for her might be something that enables him to choose to fight against the Witness, and may be enough motivation to break away and join our forces. This is before we even look at Eramis, who is clearly wavering in her support for the Witness, and as a result is seeing more and more of her house being turned into Wrathborn and Scorn. This is supposedly a gift from the Witness, but it's very clear that it's not. If anyone's loyalty is going to be tested first, I think that it would be hers. All of this leads us up to a big question mark, of course, and one particular group of individuals that most certainly is going to be at the Witness's side: the Scorn. I know that there are some people who are going to be joining Destiny recently, and I don't know if there's been a recent reminder in any videos about what the Scorn really are, because I know that that's actually kind of confusing to some. So yeah, let's go ahead and give you a small reminder. The Scorn are essentially zombie fallen. They are undead Eliksni who have been resurrected using the power of darkness. Their ether has been turned into dark ether, and their will has been overridden. They will serve the will of whoever their master is without question or regard for their personal safety, and often they retain little to no recollection of their past lives unless they have certain special circumstances hoisted upon them. Only larger Scorn, such as Barons, have shown some degree of sentience and personality, and have shown independence enough to lead other Scorn or perhaps even simply to make their own choices. Now, here's the thing. We know that the Scorn are created through the powers of darkness, and we know this now because of lore from this season, where the Witness very specifically creates Scorn in front of Eramis. However, the first Scorn that was ever created was known as Fikrul, and he was specifically created by the Taken Wish Dragon Riven, the Ahamkara, the last Ahamkara. This was all done as an intersection between dark power from the Witness most likely and Riven's wish magic. Prince Aldrin, who at the time being was not the Crow, found the body of a dying fallen Archon and wept over it, lamenting that Guardians had killed it. In this moment, he wished for it to live, and suddenly it was returned to life. This interaction matters, and I'm going to explain why. Riven's wish magic is still potent at this point in time, and it's clear that she is the reason that Fikrul the Fanatic returned to life. She created the first Scorn. But Riven at this point has also been taken by Oryx, which means that she was, up until his death, which was prior to this moment, still under his control. While Oryx did die and Riven was free to do as she wished as a result of her wish magic, she ultimately still had dark power within her bounds. Dark power similar perhaps to that the Witness uses to create other Scorn. Of course, this all happened because she's still a taken Ahamkara. It's clear to us now that this dark power is something that does come directly from the Witness and that it can also use to create Scorn. And it makes it very clear now that the Fanatic is a very different kind of beast from the one that we might see typically raised by the Witness. Perhaps then it would be accurate to say that there is some spark of freedom and personality that resides within the Fanatic, and perhaps any other Scorn that might have been created thanks to the intersection of Riven's power. If this is the case, well, maybe there is hope for the Scorn. Maybe. One spark is enough to rouse questions, and that spark undoubtedly still exists with the Fanatic. It's worth noting that the Fanatic, despite having died thousands of times in strikes, is actually, well, meant to do that. You see, the Fanatic continuously dies over and over and over again, but also continually resurrects over and over and over again. This is actually one of the few bosses in-game that, in canon, is getting raided at multiple times. It's kind of amazing to sit there and think about it, but there are almost no other strikes or bosses or raids or anything along those lines that have this particular built-in renewal. So whenever you see someone returning to the Hollowed Lair strike, or back in the day when you could, yeah, that was its own specific instance of an attack against Fikrul. So this matters, because it does mean that Fikrul has this different kind of existence from most other Scorn, and that might imply that it is separate from other Scorn in a way that's not yet known. And this is where we need to take a look at the main role the Fanatic used to take up for the Scorn, which was that of a leader. Keep in mind that the Scorn have been commanded now by disciples to serve in their wars. The Witness has been using them as expendable shock troops and clearly doesn't seem to see them as many more than that. They are fodder, they are very expendable. Fikrul, on the other hand, is very different, and he sees them differently too. When you go on the Hollowed Lair strike and you can see Fikrul, it's very clear after the spider tank encounter that he is mad at the loss of his family. He will call the barons that you've killed family, and will even name them specifically. He will note individuals on your side of the aisle such as Petravenge and Cade 6, and ask how it's going to feel when your friends and family are killed. These are important notions because Fikrul actually cares about the well-being of the Scorn, and this makes me wonder what his beliefs are when it comes to, well, how the Witness is treating them. That's actually a factor that's probably going to matter for Fikrul, just in the same way that for Eramis it matters seeing her different members of House Salvation turned into Scorn as well. Whilst one side of the coin might see this as, well, a good thing, new Scorn being created, on the other side, maybe servitude for the Scorn was never what Fikrul had in mind. Either way, I think that it's an appropriate point to sit there and think about this, because this is actually going to matter a lot. Just in the same way that The loyalties of the Hive will be tested by Xivu Arath, and the loyalties of the Cabal may be tested by Calus. I think it's fair to say that Fikrul may have some kind of impact on how the Scorn will be affected in the future. They might be a mindless people created out of death, but that doesn't stop Fikrul from feeling a familial bond with them. And that means that our major question is this: what does Fikrul think of the Witness? My bet is this: he may have little fondness for us and our forces, including the Awoken, including Crow, who came back and, in his eyes, betrayed him, but it seems that he believes the Scorn are deserving of existence as a people. He probably wants at bare minimum for them to be able to find safety. This isn't something that we're doing, but it certainly isn't something that the Witness is encouraging either, and that leaves the question of Fikrul's loyalties open to debate. I can think of two scenarios of how this is really going to pass on. First of all, the Scion scenario, and secondly, the Eramis scenario. The Scion scenario is a way of describing the relationship that Yurix has with the Witness, and is basically surmising that a similar relationship could be reached by the Fanatic and the Witness. I could imagine the Witness at some point extending an olive branch to the Fanatic with similar promises of a prosperous Scorn people that are free to live as they choose if he should simply join the ranks of the Disciples. This doesn't seem too impossible. In fact, it only seems more likely given that such offers have worked in the past. The veracity of such claims is another question, but at that moment in time it would be very easy perhaps for Fikrul to agree, just in the same way that the Scion Yurix has agreed as well. This is the moment at which you would then have to consider what happens. He would walk merrily into the arms of the Witness, and potentially even join the ranks of the Disciples themselves. Especially after the betrayal of his presumptive father, Crow, who formerly of course was Uldren Sov, it's not hard for us to see that the Fanatic might be looking for a new authority figure in his life. If this were to happen, then I think we'd probably have to kill Fikrul again, and permanently at that, in our path to defeating the Witness. How we do end up doing that is another question, because no one is quite sure how to kill Fikrul. It's been tried over and over again, but he always resurrects. So, yeah, no one's quite certain as to how we get that done. The Eramis scenario, on the other hand, is a way of describing the Fanatic's thoughts after seeing the reckless abandon with which the Witness has thrown the Scorn into the meat grinder of war that is the Sol system. The Scorn are clearly nothing more than a tool to the Witness, and if Fikrul recognizes that and sees through its honeyed words, I imagine that he'll look to distance himself and any Scorn that he can from the influence of the Witness. This might make him somewhat of a wild card throughout the system, and might force him into our side as an uneasy ally, or at least a neutral, mutually interested party. It is an unlikely scenario, but it makes me question something rather important. Namely, could the Fanatic even wrest control of the Scorn if he was eventually given the chance to? It sounds odd, but it is worth remembering that the Scorn only followed him because of his will and control over them. And it's not hard to wager that the Witness would undoubtedly have a greater will than he would. Thus, it's unclear if Fikrul would even be able to help us if he wanted to. And there is the further question then, is it maybe possible because of Riven's wish magic? Is it maybe the asymmetric power of an Ahamkara that might give Fikrul that ability? Ultimately, it's a question that will need to be answered in time if the question about the Scorn is to be resolved, but this leaves Fikrul in the position of being one of the few wildcards throughout the system. Nobody can know for sure what's happening and what will go on with the Scorn until there's movement on their story, in some significant sense. But the Fanatic is still out there, and I think it's worth remembering him for future interactions that he might present. The Scorn of the Witness, the Scorn of the Fanatic, the Eliksni of the House of Salvation, and the Eliksni of the House of Light are all going to be important to help decide the future of the Sol system and of the peoples that live within it. It is fair to say that the Eliksni and Scorn are now both peoples that live within this system. At some point, that question is going to have to be reckoned with. The Fanatic still likely has a part to play in that question too, and he might even be an asset against the Witness if we can play our cards right. But for the moment, we just don't know enough, and so I extend the Fikrul fanatic question to you. What do you think's going to happen? Personally, I'm of the opinion that it really depends on how the witness treats the Scorn going forward. But maybe you guys have a different opinion of your own. If you do, go ahead and leave them down below in the comments section. I'm looking for any opinions you might have, because you know what? This is the most open-ended question at the moment. Nobody is quite sure. All that being said, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and leave a like, and if you want more Destiny lore content, hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership is quite enough for me. And that in the meantime, my name is Bife. Prodacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.